Well, good morning, everyone. Good to see you all here. Let's begin by reading our scripture of the morning, and that is found in Zephaniah chapter 1. We're going to begin reading at verse 4. There are some very interesting things that we're going to be taking a look at today. Zephaniah 1:4. So I will stretch out my hand against Judah and against all the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and I will cut off the remnant of Baal from this place. And the names of the idolatrous priests, along with the priests, and those who bow down on the housetops to the host of heaven, and those who bow down and swear to the Lord, and yet swear by Milcom. Going on to verse 6. And those who have turned back from following the Lord, and those who have not sought the Lord or inquired of him, be silent before the Lord God. For the day of the Lord is near, for the Lord has prepared a sacrifice. He has consecrated his guests. Then it will come about on the day of the Lord's sacrifice that I will punish the princes, the king's sons, and all who clothe themselves with foreign garments. And I will punish on that day all who leap on the temple threshold, who fill the house of their Lord with violence and deceit. On that day, declares the Lord, there will be the sound of a cry from the fish gate, a wail from the second quarter, and a loud crash from the hills. Wail, O inhabitants of the martyr, for all the people of Canaan will be silenced, and all who weigh out silver will be cut off. It will come about at that time that I will search Jerusalem with lamps, and I will punish the men who are stagnant in spirit, who say in their hearts, the Lord will not do good or evil. Moreover, their wealth will become plunder, and their houses desolate. Yes, they will build houses, but not inhabit them, and plant vineyards, but not drink their wine. May the Lord add his blessing to this reading of his word. Before we get into the ins and outs and verse by verse of the text that we just read, I want to go back to something that we took up last week, and that is over in the book of Revelation. Revelation chapter 6, if you'll remember, we took a look at verse 8. Revelation 6:8. There's one thing I would like to bring up that is, I think, of interest in this text. We are in the text, John is describing part of the tribulation period. That's a 7-year period. The seals are being poured out, God's wrath upon a Christ-rejecting planet, the planet Earth. And here it is revealed to John about something that's will take place in this tribulational period. He says, I looked, and behold, an ashen horse, and he who sat on it had the name Death, and Hades was following with him. Authority was given to them over a fourth of the earth to kill with the sword, and with famine, with pestilence, and by the wild beasts of the earth. What we took a look at was that if the population trends hold as they are today, that this would mean the deaths of 2 billion people, 1/4 of the population. And I got to thinking about this, and what I thought was some student of the Bible reading this back in the day, back, say, in the 19th century, back in the first halves of the 20th century, that figure of 2 billion would sound very almost impossible to them. How in the world, in a short period of time, relatively speaking, could you have 2 billion deaths? We looked at figures from World War I of the death toll. World War II, the highest in both wars was somewhere around 50 million, I believe, that we saw last time. And so someone reading this back when would think, how in the world, like I said, is this going to happen? And a possibility is, now there's no verse to support this, but a possibility is that they would not have asked that question had they lived up until August of 1945. That's when the atomic bomb was dropped. So perhaps, and I can only say perhaps, during the Great the Great Tribulation, the second half, but particularly the first half, I think is where this is recording, what he's talking about. There is the possibility of nuclear warfare and untold millions of people up to the figure off when you add famines and when you add the wild beasts that are talked about here. That figure doesn't seem strange to us with the great death tolls that atomic warfare can bring. So, with that bit of information passed on for your attention and thought, let's go now to Zephaniah chapter 1, and we're going to begin at verse 4. Now, one of the things about this is that God now turns Zephaniah's attention to the southern kingdom. What we saw earlier in the first 3 verses was the worldwide judgment over all the earth, and that would have to be a reference to the tribulation period. That's why we went over into the book of Revelation to get further information. Now, what we want to look at in specifically is an Old Testament reference in Deuteronomy 28, verse 49. Deuteronomy 28, verse 49, we see that Israel was clearly warned of a cycle of discipline, the highest discipline possible, as revealed in Deuteronomy 28, verse 49, would come upon Israel, whether it's the northern kingdom or the southern kingdom. And so we read this. This is the zenith in the cycle of disciplines. The Lord will bring a nation against you from afar. Well, according to Zephaniah's prediction, that's going to be Babylon. The Lord will bring a nation against you from afar. And when he says afar, he means afar. Babylon is 350 miles away from Jerusalem. From the end of the earth, as the eagle swoops down, a nation whose language you shall not understand. Now, if you've ever been in a foreign country and you don't speak the language, you know that's a very helpless feeling. You can't communicate with people. You can't make your desires known. You can't even order from a menu. So it's a very difficult feeling. When the Jews go into Babylon in 3 waves of deportation, that's what they're going into. So this country that's coming against them will be fierce, ruthless Babylon on the march. Now, it's going to be about 20 years before this happens, so they are being warned. And in God's grace, they have been warned and are being warned, have been warned by Deuteronomy, are being warned by 3 separate prophets who are operating in Israel and the southern kingdom at this time. Zephaniah is one of them. Jeremiah is another one. And so they have no excuse. Now, what Zephaniah is going to show is that this coming captivity, this cycle of discipline, doesn't just happen. He's going to explain in graphic detail, as we just read, graphic detail as to the reasons they are being disciplined. So it's not just an accident of history that this is going to take place. It's interesting, and any Bible student back in the day would have a red flag go up when he read the first line of verse 4. So I will stretch out my hand. Now, this is Zephaniah delivering God's message. The I here is a reference to God. I will stretch out my hand against Judah. Well, where have they read that before? they have read that in the book of Exodus, because over and over in the book of Exodus, God says to Moses and Aaron, I'm going to stretch out my hand against Egypt. He says that in different places. Exodus 3:20, I will stretch out my hand. And then when you read on to Exodus 7, verse 5, he says, the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord when I stretch out my hand on Egypt to bring the sons of Israel from their midst. And then over and over, more than 10 times, I think 17 times, he says, I will stretch out my hand. Then he says to Moses and to Aaron, stretch out your hands. And this hand is not coming to offer a blessing. This hand is coming against Egypt. So God tells Moses and Aaron to do this. Now, when we go on and read in verse 4, we read something that we would not have known if we didn't have this verse here and other verses in the book of Jeremiah. I will stretch out my hand against Judah and against all the inhabitants of Jerusalem. Now, here, an Israelite would have his ears perk up because they had come to believe that the temple was like a rabbit's foot. As long as the temple's here, nothing's going to happen to us. Why? Because God's presence is there, and he wouldn't let anything happen to the temple. Well, where's the temple? Well, that's in Jerusalem. So here, he's pointing out that even though the temple is there, there's still going to be destruction of the city of Jerusalem. It's not a lucky charm, this temple, that's going to protect you. And there he says what I was referring to a moment ago that tips us off to something. The southern kingdom had a good king, Hezekiah. He initiated reforms, destruction of the altars of Baal. Then along comes two evil kings, and then along comes a good king, and that's Josiah. That's where that book of Deuteronomy, as we saw last time, discovered in the temple, and he had it read to the people. He was in mourning that they had not even been observing the Passover when all of that was read to them. And he initiated reforms. But now look at the last half of verse 4. I will cut off the remnant of Baal. A remnant of Baal worshipers is still there. So this tips us off that the reforms of Hezekiah and Josiah were too little and too late. They did not accomplish enough to rid the southern kingdom of this horrific, terrible Baal worship. Now, what's happened here is, as I've entitled our study, is the rot. Zephaniah is going, as he lists the reasons for the discipline, to point out to Israel their society is shot through with rot. It has been infiltrated by the most horrible of horrors, as we're going to see. And no class of society is immune from this rot. And so he says here he's going to cut off the remnant of Baal from this place. So the idols are going to be destroyed. The high places are going to be destroyed when Babylon comes marching through. Now something else, and now here he begins with the first strata of society in which the rot has developed. Call it apostasy, call it rot, it's the same thing. And the names of the idolatrous priest, and this is really strange. Okay, he said the idolatrous priest along with the priest. Well, what's going on here? This is tipping us off to the fact that there are two classes of priests in existence at this time. When we think about Baal worship here, in Judges chapter 2, verse 13, what we find in that verse is the introduction of Baal worship, and these priests were involved with it. In Judges 2:13, we read, "So they forsook the Lord and served Baal." Now, when the author says served Baal, what was involved in the service was both male and female prostitution, and, if that's not horrible enough, human sacrifice. That's what Baal worship meant. So when you read Baal worship, this is what's going on in Israel, and this is to be imported into any phrase that talks about Israel being involved in Baal worship. And look, that's Judges chapter 2. That is so early with Israel in the promised land and early in the book of Judges. Well, that verse mentions it, but then you get on into the Kings and Chronicles, and you run into the terrible, evil King Ahab and his queen Jezebel. The lineage of Jezebel is given in the Bible, and we learn from her genealogy that she was the daughter of a man named Ethbaal, or Ethbaal, Ethbaal, Ethbaal. Look at the end of that word, Baal. The prefix means with Baal. So when Ahab marries Jezebel, he's marrying the daughter of a priest of Baal. And when she gets cranked, she imports Baalism and Baal worship and Baal priests into Israel. So no wonder this society priesthood is shot through with rot. Look at, again, that interesting phrase, well, there are idolatrous priests along with the priests. Now, it's not saying that this second reference to priests are all right, but it is pointing out two classes of priests. One class of priests was appointed by the king. Well, that's not legitimate. The priests are supposed to be from the tribe of Levi. They're not appointed in that sense. They're appointed only in the sense that they're from the tribe of Levi. But a king in Israel had no right to appoint priests outside the tribe of Levi. These other priests that are mentioned here are from the tribe of Levi, but they're corrupt, just as these other priests are corrupt, as we see as we go through this. Now, beginning in verse 5, this is easy to deal with in the sense that he mentions the corruption that is among the priests. And he shows us by introducing each apostasy, each kind of apostasy, I guess is the best way to say it, with the phrase that begins verse 5, and those. Now he's talking about those of the priesthood. And he's going to give detailed information about what these priests are doing, the acts of worship that they are doing. And so each of these acts begins with, and those. And those, we can fill in the blank here, and those priests. That's in context with verse 4. And those who bow down, those priests who bow down, he's talking about cutting them off. And notice he says he's going to cut off even their names. They're going to be wiped out. The record's going to be wiped of who these priests are. Your name, your legacy, your name is not even going to be continued in the historical records. Your legacy will be, the corruption will be, but not your names. They're going to be blotted out. All right, so the act of worship that some of these priests are doing, they are bowing down on the housetops to the host of heaven. Now, this is the worship of the sun, the moon, and the stars. And this came in through paganism. So we see the southern kingdom has been infected by the people around them, the pagans around them. They were warned specifically against this, word by word by word, in Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 19. They were specifically warned against worshiping the sun, the moon, and the stars. Now, if you've studied any Greek or Roman mythology, there was this god of the sun, and then there's the goddess, I believe it was Diana, I don't know for sure, of the moon. Here is the specific warning, Deuteronomy 4:19. And beware not to lift up your eyes to heaven and see the sun and the moon and the stars, all the host of heaven, and be drawn away and worship them and serve them, those which the Lord your God has allotted to all the peoples under the whole heaven. The pagans are doing this, and here they have been infiltrated. Well, that is a very word for word specific warning. But in the book of Genesis, they have another statement that would exclude sun, moon, and stars worship. And that is Genesis 1 and 2 told them that God created the sun, moon, and the stars. They are created things. They are not gods. They are inanimate objects. God created them. So you talk about warning as far as these people of Israel had. They had been warned in Deuteronomy and in the book of Genesis. All right, that's one act of worship. And remember, the housetops are flat back in the day. So these priests would get up on the roofs and bow down. And the idea here of bowing down is bowing low to the host of heaven. All right, the second group. And those priests who bow down and swear to the Lord, and yet swear by, and this is another spelling of Molech, M-O-L-E-C-H. It's the same thing, same God. Now they swear by Molech, and by swearing by this God, they are making an oath. Moloch, curse you. If I don't do such and such, may Moloch curse me, is the idea here. So what's going on in all of this is this worship that has infiltrated from the nations around them. They have become like the world. The priest worshiping Molech, this is the god of the Ammonites. So they have adopted Ammonite worship. Jeremiah wrote about what the worship of Moloch had involved with it. We see this in the book of Jeremiah, chapter 32, verse 35. Jeremiah 32, verse 35. Now, Jeremiah is a contemporary of Zephaniah. And here's what he said the Jews were doing because of their worship of this God. Quote, they built the high places of Baal. So this is often spoken of in the Old Testament, the high places. That's where these altars were, to Moloch or to Baal, and they conducted their worship, quote unquote, services there. The high places of Baal that are in the valley of Ben Hinnom. Now here's the horror of horrors. To cause their sons and their daughters to pass through the fire to Molech. This is human sacrifice of children going on in the southern kingdom, which I have not commanded them, nor had it entered my mind that they should do this abomination to cause Judah to sin. All right, that's another form of worship that was going on. In verse 6, and those who, again introducing these types of priest worship, who have turned back from following the Lord. Our word for this is apostate. They have become apostate. Then we read this last category, those who have not sought the Lord are inquired of him. So, according to my count, we have 4 different activities of this rot going on in the priesthood of Israel. This last one is a reference to the fact of, well, kumsi, kumsa, they're just indifferent. They don't care one way or the other. They're just in it to be in it. They're just in it for what they can get out of it. Jeremiah is going to mention that as well. Now, in view of this, what he's just mentioned, in view of the coming judgment, you need to be quiet. You need to think about this. You need to be afraid of what's coming. This sounds like Habakkuk, doesn't it? Let all the earth keep silent, as we studied in Habakkuk. This is the same command. Be silent before the Lord God in view of what's going to come. And here we read what is a familiar refrain if you were just to sit down and read through the book of Zephaniah. The day of the Lord, the day of the Lord, the day of the Lord is mentioned over and over again. The day of the Lord in context is this coming judgment. For the day of the Lord is near. Now here is a very graphic word picture. We're going to have another one a little bit later. For the Lord has prepared a sacrifice. Well, what's the sacrifice? It's the southern kingdom. It's Judah. They are looked upon as a sacrifice. For the Lord has prepared a sacrifice. He has consecrated his guests. Who are the guests? That's the Babylonians. Well, what are the Babylonians going to do with the sacrifice? They're going to devour it. They're going to eat it. That's the word picture of how destructive this whole scenario of in these 3 attacks, and particularly the last one. The last one in 586 BC will have the largest number of deportees than the other 2. Remember, Daniel's in the first one, Ezekiel's in the second one. Jeremiah goes with Jews to Egypt reluctantly. Ezekiel is going to go to a place outside Babylon. And Daniel, taken in the first wave, he's going to be in Babylon. So God has set it up in these deportations. Each group of Jews in God's grace will be ministered to by one of his chosen servants. I almost said prophets, but you know, Daniel is not really by vocation. He's not a prophet. God revealed things to him, but he functions in the royal court. Ezekiel functions among the common people in this other location. Jeremiah ministers to the Jews in Egypt. They are covered, undeservedly so, by the grace of God. He has consecrated his guests. Then it will come about on, here's our phrase again, on the day of the Lord's sacrifice. Now he goes to another class of people where the rot is. And he's going to show that they too will be punished. The royalty is not exempt. They will be punished by this discipline, the zenith of all disciplines. Then it will come about on the day of the Lord's sacrifice, I will punish the princes. Now that's when we read that, we think of, well, that's the king's sons. But no, that can't be, because the king's sons are in the next clause. The princes, that's the royal court, like the king's advisors, or I guess what we would call in our society the cabinet of the president. I will punish the princes, so that includes that category. Now the king's sons. Now the kings that are reigning during this 3 attacks, their sons either wind up in in Babylon, or in Egypt, or the last ones in 586, the king has to watch the Babylonians kill his sons. And then they blind the king. So now they're taken care of. Now, this one really sounds strange. This next clause really sounds strange to us, but it shouldn't. Because we have something going on today that has endured since early ancient times. And all who clothe themselves with foreign garments. That really sounds strange. But does it? Well, not necessarily. We have cases in point today. When some people choose their clothing, they choose it based on their values. If you've ever seen film clips of the students in our universities who are in an uproar and siding with Hamas against the Jews, what are they wearing? They're wearing scarves or masks that are indicative of Hamas, the black and white scarves. They're wearing those. And when, just like in this verse, when this was going on in Israel, it's the same thing that's going on in our country in the sense that their clothing is symbolic. Their clothing is symbolic in the sense that they are saying, we adopt the values as represented by this clothing. Now, prior to this that we're seeing on our college campuses, it isn't just in colleges. I found this incident in Scottsdale, Arizona. Students of Desert Mountain High School, not college, high school, planned a walkout. And as part of the walkout, students were urged to dress in pro-Hamas attire. Black armbands, and then that scarf type thing that they wear. Now, I just mentioned that there was a craze in America. I haven't seen it lately or heard of it lately. But remember back when the most popular T-shirt in America, in the world, I guess, was one with a picture of Che Guevara, that Castro, communist, vicious killer, and students were wearing his image. So this isn't something that a verse that we read and we say, well, it doesn't have any reference or application to today. It's all over the place today as students in rebellion choose their clothing and saying, our values are that of a terrorist group. Now we read on, and this one is really puzzling, very puzzling. I will punish on that day all who leap on the, now here you see the word temple in italics. So it's not there. So this verse says, and I will punish on that day all who leap on the threshold. So now what in the world is that a reference to? Well, there are two schools of thought on this. Number one is that the Jews had adopted a pagan superstition. And that pagan superstition is recorded in 1 Samuel 5, 4 through 5. 5, 4 through 5. This has reference to an incident that we're all familiar with if we know hardly anything about the Old Testament. But I'll read those verses. Now he's talking about the Philistines. But when they arose early in the next morning, behold, Dagon, that's the god of the Philistines, and his image was in this temple. Behold, Dagon had fallen on his face to the ground before the ark of the Lord. Philistines had captured the ark. They had placed it in the temple of Dagon, and then this supernatural event takes place. And the head of Dagon and both the palms of his hands were cut off on the threshold. Only the trunk of Dagon was left to him. Now here is where it is thought this verse what this verse is describing originated. Therefore, neither the priest of Dagon nor all who enter Dagon's house tread on the threshold of Dagon in Ashdod to this day. So what's thought here is that the Israelites had adopted that superstition in reference to their temple. Now, this explains why the translators put temple in here, because they went back to that 1 Samuel text as the generator of this custom in Zephaniah's day. That's their reason. Now, there is another school of thought. Now, both of these are within the conservative Bible-believing camp. We're not talking about liberalism versus conservatism at all. The other idea is that this is a word picture of those who jumped into people's homes to steal the contents inside and then put the contents, let's say, either for yourself or donate it to the temple or whatever. In other words, it's a picture of a lawless society, this robbery that was going on. So that's the origin, two thoughts on how this idea originated. Now we find the rot that's in the business class. On that day, here we have that familiar refrain, the day of the Lord. Well, to finish out verse 9, who filled the house of their Lord with violence and deceit. So that's where I got the reference or mentioned they donate what they stole to the temple. Verse 10, on that day declares the Lord, there will be the sound of a cry from the fish gate. This is doubly interesting because according to ancient historical records, when Nebuchadnezzar conquered Jerusalem and they broke through the walls, this is where Nebuchadnezzar entered, the fish gate. A wall from, a cry from the fish gate, a wail from the second quarter, that's a section in Jerusalem next to the fish gate, and a loud crash from the hills. So the echo of all of this goes on and on. Wail, O inhabitants of the mortar, that's a district in Jerusalem. For all the people of Canaan will be silenced when they see what Babylon does to the southern kingdom. And the businessmen involved, all who weigh out silver will be cut off. It will come about at that time that, what a graphic word picture this is. It is a picture of God searching through Jerusalem, carrying lamps and searching through Jerusalem. I will search Jerusalem with lamps. He's searching out those who, as he describes it, are, and I will punish the men who are, this is an interesting phrase, stagnant in spirit. That means complacent. They haven't worshiped the Lord. They've just been complacent Israelites. But notice what they believe, what they have come to believe. And I will punish the men who are stagnant in spirit. Now here's what they say, here's what they believe, who say in their hearts, God will not do good or evil. God's not going to do anything. He's not going to bless. He's not going to curse. He's just inactive. He's just not. He is complacent. He's not going to do anything. This isn't coming. This discipline. Why? Well, he doesn't do anything. Doesn't do anything good or evil. Is the conclusion that this sad state of affairs in Jerusalem, God can do nothing, is another way to put this, good or bad. So don't worry about it. God says he's going to search them out. Now, Josephus has a fascinating reference here, and it's not in reference to this, but it is during one of those battles that Israel fought, say, between the two testaments, where the conquerors when they came into Jerusalem, they literally dragged Jews out of the sewers who were hiding in the sewers. And this is sort of a word picture of that. It's not a prophecy of that, but it had been done, will be done later in Israel's history, where the conquerors search it out, search the city out. Here God says, I'm going to search the city out. Now, what we're reading is a shocking picture of apostasy. The thing about apostasy, departure from the faith, they had the faith, they've departed from it. The results are horrible as to what's going on with the rod in their every class in their city. But what is surprising about apostasy is the names of the apostates, who they are. You'd never expect brother so-and-so or pastor so-and-so to all of a sudden come to the conclusion there's no hell, to come to various conclusions that deny cardinal doctrines of the faith. So when these apostates are revealed, we're all surprised. We're all shocked. Let's take Moses. He comes down from the mountain, Mount Sinai, and what's going on? My own brother is leading idol worship. My brother did this. We can't imagine the shock that was on the face of Moses. We know what he did very dramatically. But now here's an interesting scripture, Judges 18:30. Judges 18:30. And in that verse, I'll turn over there, Judges 18:30. To go over there, 30. Yeah, there it is. That's the next one. All right, this is a shock. The sons of Dan set up for themselves the graven image, and Jonathan, the son of Gershom, the son of Manasseh. He and the sons were priests to the tribe of the Danites until the day of the captivity of the land. Now, you and I read that, and we say, what? So what? What is so shocking about that? What's shocking about it is a word has been changed, and textual critics caught it. Let's back up. The sons of Dan set up for themselves the graven image, and Jonathan, okay, he's the one that leads in this, the son of Gershom, the son of Manasseh. There's the word, Manasseh. Textual critics discovered that word had been changed. That's not Manasseh. The word that was there, which they have, some translations have a footnote about it, is Moses. The apostate is the grandson of Moses. That's shocking. That shocks the system. And so, you wouldn't expect that. Aaron, he saw all these plagues of Egypt. He led Israel. He was the priest, tribe of Levi, and he makes the golden calf. Well, that's the way apostasy operates. It's from those you would not expect. Here's a quote from Dr. Andy Woods, president of Chafer Theological Seminary. Do not look for apostasy in the world. Look for it in books written by Christians. Look for it from pulpits occupied by so-called men of God. Look for it in so-called Christian seminaries. Look for it in Christian bookstores. That's where it is. It's not in the world. And I would close with this statement by Dr. John F. Walvoord, second president of Dallas Seminary. And then he's commenting on how apostasy works in a seminary, in a Christian school. He says, someone gets into a position of teaching and they start to say things that aren't quite right. a little off. And typically what happens is Satan puts the person in a position at a time when the school has very weak leadership and a non-aggressive president. Nobody really challenges what this faculty member is saying because, after all, they have a PhD from Europe and they know everything, right? And as that faculty member begins to promote ideas, other faculty members, another faculty member gets contaminated, and another one, and another one. And eventually, what you have is a whole school, if you're not careful. Then eventually, the whole school has moved away from its theological position. That's the way it works. He's seen it. And you can go and look at the history of various schools, and that's the way it all gets started. It just takes one, and then the infiltration begins, and Satan has his person in place. Curtis?